What's happening, my beautiful financiers in training? Welcome back to another episode of the Do.Different.Better Show, where we talk wealth wisdom and money moves and make finance simple for everyday people. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, founder of Social Impact Now, managing director of the Integrated Capital Fund, and founder and CEO of Connect Up Institute. I'm here, your resident business and all things money doula. So, guess what? Today's episode is going to be amazing. We are talking about moving from hustle to exit, the real boss moves on taxes, exits, and freedom. I have a great guest, so make sure you break out your favorite note taker device and buckle up. On the show today, I have the one and only Peter Culver, co-founder of Wealth Thrive. Peter is a Yale alum and ex-BNY Mellon Senior Wealth Director. He brings over 40 years of know-how to help entrepreneurs and their families thrive financially and personally. He's coached clients with more than $2 billion, that's with a B, in investments, consistently ranked as a top advisor for 8 years, and was part of BNY Mellon's Platinum Circle and Chairman's Council. Peter crafts personalized strategies for high-profile clients and emphasizes fitness and wellness. I know you guys have heard me talk about this, and is a popular speaker at financial podcasts and events. Welcome to the show, Peter. We're so grateful to have you.
Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're going to start as we always do with our guest. Tell us, what is your earliest memory of money?
So I had the question in advance. I had to actually think a little bit about this, but I think this will show you how old I am to maybe most people in your audience. But when I was, 5, 6, 7 years old, I got an allowance. It was $1 a week. And what was it? It was so long ago. I had a best friend, still one of my best friends. We would ride to the local drugstore and figure out the most clever way to spend $1 on candy. And it sounds sort of silly, but it was like, I could buy 2 Snickers or 1 Snicker and 6 of these things or whatever. So it was, I don't know how much that actually played into, financial training. I think that was a smart thing. I do that with my own daughter. I give her an allowance. It's a whole heck of a lot more money than $1. I'll tell you that in today's world. But
right.
And then I think from a very early age, my parents just always said, you got to get a job. It doesn't matter what it is. So, I think having early on the experience of earning your own money and making mistakes and maybe doing a few smart things, that's a good way just to begin to learn how to use money.
What was your first job? Do you remember?
I remember exactly. So I live in a part of Connecticut. This industry doesn't exist anymore. It used to, but Connecticut is known for growing tobacco.
Oh.
That sounds weird. That's used for cigar wrappers. And there's something about the climate and the way they grow it.
Oh.
So I went in fields and picked tobacco.
Wow. I did not know that. That's a new one.
Just all the typical jobs you could have at that age when you had no skills. I did that. I was like the bottom rung on the totem pole when they were building an apartment building complex near. So, but that was just sort of, in our family, that was a given that you should have a job. So I would say from probably 14 or 15, which was probably illegal at the time. Probably some of the jobs I had were illegal, but I don't know, just always, it was just kind of part of the deal, right? So I think that was good for me.
I love that. Now, this might be a different story, but when did you realize that money actually had influence? Like there was some sort of like, oh, this is a lever. Is that a different story, or is that the kind of woven into the story you just shared?
I think I'd pivot off that a little bit, and it may relate to what we're going to talk about more. I mean, yes, money buys power, money buys influence, all that kind of stuff. And maybe that's cool. That's not really the reason I'm interested in money. Is the reason to have money is to do the other things that you want to do, which they're born influencers and that's their motivation. I think the other part of it is it gives you the freedom to build the life you really want for yourself. And we'll talk about this probably today. In my view, that should be a life that's not just based on money, but a bunch of other things than just having a lot of money.
I agree. And yes, I'm so excited to get into that because I'm part of that philosophy as well. So let's kind of get into really thinking about specifically entrepreneurs. So as you say that you help entrepreneurs become rich beyond money.
Right.
For those of us building wealth without inherited assets or financial safety nets, what does that actually look like in practice?
So I guess I'd say a couple of things. One, I haven't done a scientific study, but I would bet if somebody did, the overwhelming majority of people who became successful entrepreneurs didn't have any money from their family. And that may be part of the reason why I know my partner Noah came from a very challenged family. Money was an issue. And I think initially he decided I need to be rich just so I don't have to worry about not having any money, right? That's kind of step one. And then this whole philosophy of there's got to be something more to the benefit of wealth than just having a lot of money in your bank account, right? So,
right.
And we've tried to make that a part of our business philosophy and the work we do with our clients, which we'll probably talk about a little bit.
Yeah. So many of our families talking about that are the first ones to start a business. And I agree. I mean, I talk about in the first episode, my humble beginnings and growing up in an apartment and sharing a bedroom with my brother until I was 16.
Where did you grow up?
Where
did you grow up?
I grew up in Los Angeles, California.
Oh, sure.
So I grew up actually in Hollywood, California, which is not the fancy pants place that it is.
No, I know. I know where. Yeah.
So it was rough. Hollywood was not, it was a little rough, but I had the very good fortune of having a mom that wanted me to go to Catholic school, and the school was literally just a couple of blocks from Hollywood Boulevard. So, and back then there were no malls, right? So we would leave school after school and we would go hang out on Hollywood Boulevard. So we'd go to like the Egyptian theater, we'd hang out at the Chinese theater. Like that was what we did for fun.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah.
But that whole idea of, I know for me that's been a driver of just like seeing both of my parents struggle and seeing my grandmother not necessarily struggle, because my grandmother was she was a live-in nurse, but she worked 6 days a week and she only had one day off. And that was when we got to hang out with her. And so I'm like, I don't want just one day off. Like, that's not okay. I'm like, to your point, I'm like, I've got candy to buy. I've got ice cream to buy. I can't do that if I only have one day off, right? 3 hours of that was going to church. So, so I'm like, no, I need more time in my life. And so how can I make sure that I'm able to do that? But also I was probably the first entrepreneur in my family. So how do you help people overcome their fear around money and particularly taxes? And I know that in the past I've struggled with this, like money management, when they don't necessarily have generational guidance. They don't have somebody like walking them through and being able to explain to them like, oh no, this is the thing. So like, what's some of the advice that you give them?
Yeah. So I would say, a couple of things. So again, I would say in the same vein that lots of people that become entrepreneurs, their families weren't entrepreneurs. So they had to like figure it out. Right. And I would say for probably largely the same reason, a lot of entrepreneurs don't come from an affluent background. So, so I think there are a couple of things, is join some organization, some networking group of other similarly situated people. So I don't know if your audience is familiar. There's EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. That's a whole structure,
right,
fundamentally to help people run and manage a business, but it tends to spin out into these other topics like money management and taxes and stuff like that. I would say then there are other organizations like YPO, Vistage, sort of peer-to-peer organizations. There's many of them. So, find a way to hang out with other people that are in the same situation as you, that you can exchange ideas. I guess, what I would say is I tell a story. I learned, it's a little bit of a joke, but a reporter is interviewing a very successful entrepreneur. And she says to the entrepreneur, "How was it that you got so successful?" He thinks for a minute or two. He says, if I really think about it, most of my wealth came from making 3 or 4 smart decisions during my life. She says, "Well, how was it that you were able to make so many smart decisions?" And he says, "Well, I had a lot of experience, 40 years of it." Mm-hmm. So she's trying to write a story. Well, come on, can you tell me a little bit more about your experience? He said, "Yeah, I made thousands of mistakes."
Right.
So I think one trait of people who start to be entrepreneurs, and especially ones that become successful entrepreneurs, they're not afraid to try something. It's not all going to work. And, you just try this idea. That doesn't work. Try another idea, but just keep plugging, because I think some of it is just hanging in there, being smart. The other thing I would say is, I think if you interview a lot of entrepreneurs, they're what is sometimes referred to as lifelong learners, right? You can't ever be too smart, get too much information. Now, when I started out in the business, you either had to go to the bookstore or the library and get a book and do all that stuff. It's all readily available, and you can program your phone or your computer to teach you stuff. So, I wouldn't, and I like to say a lot that, so I worked on Wall Street for a while, and there are a lot of people on Wall Street that want to make you believe that managing money and taxes and cash flow and all that stuff is so complicated that
I agree.
You need to pay them a lot of money to help you.
Exactly. I tell that to my audience all the time. I'm like, this stuff it's detailed, but it's not complicated.
The basic principles are very common sense. Guess what? If you spend less money than you make, you will accumulate wealth. If you pay less taxes than you absolutely have to, you will accumulate wealth. Just those kinds of things. So I know it's easy to say from where I sit, 40 years into it, but don't be afraid of what you don't know. Just hang out with other people who have the answers. Read books that have the answers. Try stuff. Those are the people who win. It's not one of my favorite people as a person, but Elon Musk came up with some idea to create an electric car that's a cool car, right? And my guess is 30 other people had the same idea. Right. But he had whatever it was, the chutzpah, the desire, the push through to get it done. A lot of, of success is just persistence.
I agree with that. I mean, I was just talking to an entrepreneur literally in my office the other day, and I was trying to convey to her, she was like, "Yeah, but Elaine, you always seem to know like the right answer." And to your point of your story, I said, "Yeah." I said, there's a great story that Kobe Bryant talks about of like, you saw me at the championship. You saw when I dunked that three-pointer, right? But you didn't see the thousands of hours at 11 o'clock at night when I was shooting baskets and I wasn't making those free throws.
There's a great book about that by, what's the guy's name? I can't, but it's about a concept of 10,000 hours.
Yes.
And it talks about Bill Gates, and maybe it talks about MJ and some other people. But yes, most people get good at stuff not by just falling out of bed in the morning and, whoa, I'm good at that. It's constant repetition and training. And I think there's a point in there that, especially if you talk about athletes, what's known as visualization is a big part of that, right? And so
Huge.
I think that's applicable to business. We use a lot in our business, sort of that phrase, begin with the end in mind, right?
Stephen Covey, I'm a big fan.
Don't be afraid to throw stuff against the wall, but don't just throw stuff against the wall. What's your goal? What are you trying to get to? Most successful business people and most successful athletes, they're very goal oriented, right? And there's not an automatic translation of being good at sports to being good in business. But to me, Shaquille O'Neal is an incredibly successful business person. Michael Jordan is an incredibly successful business person. So, and a host, there's some skills there that are translatable.
Absolutely. That whole thing of fail, I always say, tell my team, hey, we're going to fail fast and we're going to fail forward. And it's okay. And I tell people who come to my company, I said, there's nothing in this company you're going to break. Our company is set up so you can't break anything. You might make some bad decisions. It might cost us a little bit of money, but you're also, there's going to be a reward because you're going to learn something that's actually going to turn into making us money, or there'll be some kind of either professional return on investment or financial return on investment. But this whole point of not being afraid to fail, that is actually part and parcel, not only I think of entrepreneurship, but adulthood, right?
Oh, sure.
And so making sure we don't lose sight of, but I think in this era, especially with our Gen Zers and our younger millennials, I think that
they're looking for instant gratification.
And they're so afraid of making mistakes, not understanding. And literally I was working with this founder and I said, we were working through something and she said, okay, at the end, she's like, okay, so is this going to work? I said, I don't know. I really don't know. I said, we've created the things, we've looked at the data, we've created this thing with the best possible information we have. So based on the current information, maybe it should work, but it might not because we don't know the full universe. And I said, but the only way you're going to find out is to put it out there. So, we're going to wrap up this segment. This has been such an exhilarating conversation. So I want to invite my audience to stay tuned. We are with Peter Culver, co-founder of Wealth Thrive, and I will see you after the break. All righty. Right. So Peter and I did a pre-interview and talked about some things, and I wanted to make sure I brought those in to give you the benefit of his wisdom. So if you talk about the 10 mistakes after an 8-figure exit, but what if somebody is just getting started or growing a 6-figure business?
Sure.
What are some advice that you can give to them, or some direction of how they think about that? And then what are the levers to move to get to the 8-figure business and exit?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things there. And maybe remember we talked in the first segment about beginning with the end in mind, right? So if you think about it, if you're going to sell a business, one thing to do is think about that the way the buyer would think about that, right? What does a buyer want to buy, right? You want to create a business that somebody wants to buy. So this isn't an exclusive list, but 4 things at least that buyers like when they're thinking about buying a business are they've got to have good, accurate, up-to-date financials. They can be on QuickBooks or whatever, but you've got to be able to push a button and tell somebody how much did you make in the last quarter of the last year or whatever it is. So, that's not an expensive investment. Just do that from the beginning. It's also important to you, business owner, just to be able to track your progress, right? So I would say that's one thing. This would seem obvious, but most buyers want to see a business that has a certain number of years of profitability and hopefully increasing profitability over time. One of the most important things that buyers look for are businesses that can run without the founder.
Right.
If I'm going to buy a business, but I have to keep paying the gal who started the business, that's just cutting into my profitability. So we talked in the first segment about a system that a lot of entrepreneurs use to build and grow their business called EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. Anybody starting a business should look that up on the internet, dig into it a little bit. And it has a couple of concepts, but one of those concepts is about over time building a business that the owner stops being the owner and the operator and moves toward being the owner, but somebody else operating the business. There's much more leverage there.
Yeah, so, I talk about that in like moving from playing checkers to playing chess, right? And you've got to, at some point.
I never made that transition.
I think scrappy entrepreneurs, I know for me, it's like, it's a hard thing to like, to stay out of the things. And especially because some of the things we do are events, and I get little persnickety about like, well, move the napkin over there. And like, so I've had to like take pictures. I literally
got that from your grandmother, I bet, who
probably like making sure like everything, to create a really great experience. So what I've even done as far as our EOS, right? I've taken a picture. This is what the setup looks like. Only do the setup like this, right? But to your point, it's like, and I'm in this trend, this entrepreneurship through acquisition right now. I'm literally looking at a couple of businesses to purchase. And that's one of the deciding factors is, I don't want to buy a business that's contingent on that is solely reliant on the seller. I mean, on the the seller, but also I am also looking at, I know that I don't want to put more than like 12 months of energy into the business before I can at least partially step away, right? So being really thoughtful and clear about what can I contribute as a buyer to this business, right? So me and my partner, we're like, what we've decided is like, my thing is systems, right? So implementing EOS. My thing is marketing. That's what I did for 25 years. Her thing is operations, government contracts. So we know that these are the skills that we can bring.
So you're talking about another important part of EOS is a concept that they call right person, right seat, right? So first you got to figure out for any particular business, what are the seats you need to be a successful business, but put the right people in the seats. The other reason this, I think, is important, it's not just build a business so it's easy to sell. Kind of part of, I think, a long-term life philosophy that we advocate for is over time, build multiple streams of revenue.
Yes.
If your only stream of revenue is one business and you have to run that business, 50 hours a week, you'll never free yourself from that business. So if you can start a business, get it to a level where you migrate from being an operator to just being an owner. Well, wait a minute. Now I have 20 more hours this week and I'll start another business or I'll buy real estate so that you have multiple streams of income. That's another part of, I think, the question you asked is a lot of people start businesses. They're busy, and let's assume they build a successful business. And they're not really thinking about selling their business. In fact, we ask this question to people all the time. Oh, no, I'm never going to sell my business. It's like my baby. Two things happen. One of two things usually happens. Someone calls them on the phone who's been tracking them. They don't know that they're being tracked.
Right.
And someone says, hey, Elaine, I'll give you $10 million for that business. Now your heart starts pounding like crazy. Your mind is spinning, and you can get dragged into a process that you're not really ready for, because your business may not have really good financials, may not be able to run without you. So I think advance, and there are two parts to that. There's preparing the business for sale.
Right.
And I think what part of your question is, which most entrepreneurs never think about, is preparing me.
Yes, yourself
for
to sell.
Life after sale. So
Yes.
How much money do I need to make on my sale?
Yes.
So that when I'm on the other side of my sale, I have enough money to live on. And that's kind of one of the technical skills we specialize in. That's sort of a math problem, a cash flow kind of thing. But think about it. If you sell your business, the new buyer's not going to pay for your car.
No.
It's not going to pay the rent of the office. It's not going to pay for your health insurance. So you've got to sort of figure out, that's the quantitative aspect of start thinking well in advance. It's another version of begin with the end in mind. I think the thing that a lot of entrepreneurs never think about, especially ones who have sort of had one business for a long time. We had an entrepreneur sold a business about 3 years ago. He was totally depressed after he sold his business. And he said, and sort of, he's almost like crying when he said this. He said, it wasn't until after I sold my business that I realized how much of my ego, my sense of self-worth, my identity. And he used this image. He said, when I went to the office, I didn't have to wear a hat that said Mr. CEO because everybody knew, right?
Everybody knew.
Boy, that made me feel cool. Well, now I go to Walmart on Saturday. Nobody cares who the hell I am. They don't know who I am. So you want to, and maybe that comes back to, I think you mentioned, we use a concept in our work with our clients called rich beyond money, right? So yes, everybody wants to have some level of financial wherewithal and do cool stuff, whatever that is that you want to do. But you kind of want to have a fullness of life that I think goes beyond, and different people interpret that different ways. That could be charity, that could be activities that you like to do. But if you are thinking in the long run of selling your business, you want to start going back to visioning, right? So I'm not going to the office every day of the week.
Right.
What the hell am I going to do?
And I talk about like when we run it, I run an accelerator. It's part of my nonprofit. I run an accelerator. And the first question we ask our founders, the first question in the first week is, what is the life that this business is supposed to design? Because most people actually start a business not to start a business. They start a business because they think that there's a life that they can build with this business. So let's really think through that. And then the second question is, what does success look like? Because so that you don't wake up 10, 20, 30 years from now and have your identity all like, it's a signal when you understand like, oh, success for me is it's a 10 million, 50 million, $100 million business. It's not so much that that's your time to leave, but it is your time to look up. Look up and look around and like, do I want to keep doing this? Do I have grandchildren now that I want to spend time with?
That's the second thing that happens, right? So I said sometimes what happens to sellers is they're not thinking of selling and someone calls them on the phone and dangles something in front of them that kind of sucks them in. The other thing that just sometimes happens is they just wake up one morning and I don't want to do this anymore. But they haven't laid the foundation to get out, right? Yeah. So and both of those things typically lead to bad financial results because you haven't kind of perfected. In our work with our clients, when we have a new client, and they usually initially come for us, they want us to reduce their taxes or improve their investments or do a cash flow for them. It's all quantitative. The very first thing we do with them are two, we call them exercises. One of those is called Ideal Life. And we give them a little questionnaire, which is the sort of the thought process of the questionnaire is, hey, Elaine, you're a successful entrepreneur. I want you to look forward 5 or 10 years and tell me what your ideal life looked like. Now, you don't have to, it's not a blank slate. There's all kinds of questions, so it's easy to do. But what's really interesting to us about that is 99% of entrepreneurs, when they're asked that question, they don't talk about money. It's
Right.
where do you want to be? Who do you want to be with? Sometimes it's who you don't want to be with
Right.
anymore, right? And so not in a critical sense.
No. I call
I
that
don't
the
want to go to
seven
staff
senses.
meetings anymore. I've done that, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I don't want to do personnel evaluations anymore. I don't want to raise money anymore, whatever all this stuff is. So I do think it's important in our work, we use an image of an iceberg so we all know the iceberg, like more is above the surface than below the surface, right? So what we say is the phone rings initially because of the stuff that's above the surface. That could be paying less in tax, investing my money, all that financial stuff. But when we get into a deeper conversation with people about what they really want, they talk about things like personal success, financial freedom. A lot of them talk about higher purpose. Okay, I nailed that one. I started a business from scratch. I sold it for X, Now I want to give something back. That doesn't just have to be money. That could be time,
Could be
or
time. Yep. Talent,
experience, or things like that. So I think you'll be more satisfied whenever or if ever you sell your business. And even if you just create a business that you don't have to run full time,
right?
What am I going to do with my time? And so you want relationships, hobbies, interests, outside activities other than just your business. And so hopefully
but this whole piece of preparation. So one of the things that I tell the founders that I work with is, when I started my business, and I was a serial entrepreneur, but this was in 2017, this was the first time I wanted to have a company. I'd been a solopreneur and I had people working for me, but I had no intentions of like growing, a big business. So until this time in 2017, and I said, one of the things that I learned and I decided was I started with thinking about operating the company like I had 50 employees. So you run a company with 50 employees very different than you run a company with one employee. And here's an example, right? So I would say, when I had an intern, I wrote a job offer, right? I created a job description. Now, a lot of times, and I'm sure you've seen this, small businesses, they don't think about that till they're like on their 20th employee. And they're like, oh, maybe I should have job descriptions, right? But I'm like, actually, if you start at the beginning thinking, I think going back to your visualization that we talked about in segment 1, if like I'm looking to build a 25-person team or a 100-person team, well, start working on that on day 1, right? Which goes back to, like, I'm going to check the financials every month. I'm going to I have one of my founders that I actually invested in. She's like, I do a meeting. Because we got her to do EOS. She's like, I do an L10 meeting by myself once a month because she's a solopreneur. But she has that time on the calendar. She does her L10, even though she's the only person at the meeting. But she also records the notes of the meeting. So once again, when she starts to bring people on, she's already built a culture even within herself of like, no, this is what we do once a week. We do our L10. This is what we discuss. Here's the agenda that we discuss. Here are the benchmarks we need to talk about. Exactly. So when we think about successful exits and we think about selling the business, like, what are some of the things that somebody should think about as far as like, what is the emotional pieces that you think, or what are the questions that they should be asking themselves? Even maybe if they're not even thinking about selling, maybe they're only 5 years into the business. What might you say to like help them translate? Because I will just tell you, particularly for people of color, like, because there's been such divestment, I think sometimes we get too attached with the idea and staying until the very end, and with, like our cold dead hands, like, right. But like, I try to tell founders, like, this isn't a diminishment of you, right? To be able to say, I said, listen, let me tell you something. I said, white men will go sell a business, walk across the street and open up the same business with a different name. So to just get into that mindset of like, selling the business isn't the end of you, and you can go and do the.
Yeah.
I think the guy at Bally's, he left Bally's and then created Lifetime.
Of course.
Right. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think I'm sort of going through an analogous experience. So my youngest child is 16 and she just got her driver's license. Now, until she got her driver's license, because I'm the entrepreneur in our family. And so while I'm busy as heck, I have the much more flexible schedule than my wife, who has a quote unquote, I don't mean this in a negative way, regular job, right? So I'm the driver. So I take my daughter to sports practice, to violin practice, whatever, for years. So now she has her driver's license and she doesn't want me to do that anymore.
No.
It's killing me, right? Because those were my little moments. And
Yeah.
I don't know how good I'm doing at it, but you got to move on, right? And so I think, and the only exception maybe to that would be sometimes it turns out that it's a good idea, not always, to pass your business to someone in your family. That might be part of your vision, although I will tell you that lots of people who think that's part of their vision, the people that they're thinking of giving their business to don't want the business, or they're not the right people. So I just think you want to start early thinking both about the financial end game and kind of my lifestyle end game. And I think you're right. There are two kinds of, some sellers fill up that time that used to be occupied by their business by starting a new business because they just love starting businesses, right? And actually they like starting them more than running them. So they do that thing. Or some people are just thrilled not to keep doing that again and to allocate time and resource probably to things that they, not a criticism, but that got neglected while they were growing the business. Because in general, growing a business in those early years is very consuming process, right? You can't do it part-time. It just doesn't work that way. So, I mean, I will tell you that we wrote a book, Noah, my partner Noah and I, called Exit Rich Beyond Money. It's like a 300-page book.
Well, let's hold that thought. Let's talk about in the next segment. So let's leave folks with a cliffhanger. So this is great. So we're going to wrap up this segment. You're listening to Do Different Better with Elaine Rasmussen. And we've got my special guest, Peter Culver from Wealth Thrive. After the break, we're going to get into this book and tips that you should take away and all the reasons why you should buy this book. So come back and we'll see you after the break. Let's show you how to do different better.
Cool. But just so you know,
Better Show, you are joining me with my guest, Peter Culver from Wealth Thrive. And we were just, I left y'all on a cliffhanger in segment 2, but now we're going to dive into it. Peter was just talking about his book. So Peter, tell us about the book and why people need to read this book like yesterday.
So the title of the book is Exit Rich Beyond Money. And I would say it's a pretty extensive book. It's a couple hundred pages, although it's got pictures and exercises and stuff like that. I mean, it's not too challenging, but I think it puts together the two things we've been talking about, which are what are all the financial things I need to do to build a business that if at some point in the future I want to sell it, I'll have a successful financial exit, right? But another whole part of the business is about what we've been talking about, which is how do I prepare myself, my family, right? My whole network, that in a lot of ways, your family's identity, if you're the CEO, their identity is all wrapped up in you and being Mr. CEO and all or Mrs. CEO. So there's a whole nother component of the book about that kind of preparation for your life after sale. So you're going to have to fill all that time up with something that was occupied. It's written to be engaging. It's not a treatise. It's not like going to school. There are exercises and stuff like that. I think people, if you have that mindset, which I think you should have, beginning with the end in mind, it might be something you'd read, put away for a couple of years, but hopefully some of those, you'd be educated about things you want to be thinking about along the way to get to a totally successful exit, both financially and personally.
But it sounds like what I'm hearing is you're now preparing for a new exit in mind, right? So when you think about, I like to think about my life in chapters, right? So what's the end of that next chapter? And even with our entrepreneurs, I'm like, when we talk about, design, what's the life that this business is a design? Is it that you want to be a digital nomad? Is it that you
Correct.
want to be around for summers for your grandkids? Is it that you want to live in a different country every 3 months? Like what, and to your point, not only what is that, but what is that going to cost so that we can make sure that we financially plan for that future? But that's just a new end. It's not, we have
that right now in our company. So my partner, Noah, who I wrote the book with, he's like Mr. Travel. And he and his wife, they have 2 kids. The oldest kid is going to college next year. So he'll be at college.
Right.
And then his daughter is either going to be a freshman or a sophomore in high school. I forget which one. But to make a long story short, they're taking her out of school and spending the whole school year, half of it in Europe and half of it in Asia. And she'll homeschool, which is not all that difficult to do these days. But he's just always had this vision of wanting to do that and not do it when he's 70 years old or 80 years old. He's 49, right? So he wants to do that when he can do it with one of his kids and he's vibrant and stuff like that. Now, different strokes for different folks. That doesn't interest me at all. So
that's so funny because I did a similar thing with my son. It was
like where I live, so I'm happy here. But the good news is we built, and he can do that,
right?
Because we've built a company that doesn't rely on him being at we don't have an office, but he doesn't have to be doing stuff 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. His main role is he does a lot of writing and he does a lot of public speaking, either both live or virtual. Well, he can do that anywhere in the world. And there's a little bit of a thing we're going to have to work on time zones. So if we
especially when it gets to Asia, it's a little easier, the East Coast and Europe. But I did a similar thing. It wasn't planned, but I did a similar thing with my son where he was just having some issues in school and I had a job that required me to travel a lot. So I put him into online school, and this is maybe about he's 28 now. So this is maybe 12 years ago. And I took him everywhere with me. So, and what was great is I had a job that sent me to parts of this country that not a lot of people get to see. We went to Alaska, we went to upstate New York, up in Verona.
Nice.
And so we got, and it was around, he was like 16. So we were also doing college tours, right? So we went to Columbia while we were in New York, and he got to see the vibe. But to have that year, I can understand Noah, it's such a beautiful memory of that whole year that we got to spend together.
And actually, in his case, he got started in all this. There's a thing called semester at sea.
Yeah.
And when you're in high school, if you sign up for this and whoever pays for it, you spend a semester on a boat with a whole bunch of people. And I think he was only like 16 or 17 when he did that. And he met his wife, and they're still married. So,
that's such an amazing story.
They got together and they never broke up for any, I don't know the whole.
I love that.
Intervening stories, but I think that sparked his interest in being in lots of different places, right? And
I think that's what happened with me. I was, I don't know if you're familiar with AFS, American Field Service.
Oh,
and so I was an AFSer, and I went to Turkey when I was 18, and it was a transformational experience and has fed my trots around the world ever since then. But so we're getting ready to wrap up. So I've got a closing question for you. If you could give one money move advice to help our listeners do different better, what would it be?
So we haven't talked too much about this, and it might not be the only thing, but one of our key areas of expertise where we help entrepreneurs is paying less money in taxes. And so what I like to say is there are two ways to get wealthy in America. There are many more, but two great ways are, number one, start a business. Mm-hmm. And we love that because you're likely to become not only wealthy in a financial sense, but if you follow some of the tips we've been talking about, you may have a much richer life than someone who just goes to the office every day for 50 years, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that. But the second great way to get wealthy in America is to pay less in tax. And there are remarkable strategies that most people, totally legal, no hokey pokey there, that people can use to pay less in taxes. And, you know, when you think about putting your money in the bank or putting your money in the stock market or whatever, there's the whole concept of compounding growth of wealth, right? So if it doubles this year, then it doubles next year, the next year. Well, if you just think to yourself, what if the amount of money that's compounding is a lot more money because I paid less in taxes? Mm-hmm. And really what you're doing is you're taking money, nothing against the government or what they spend money on, but you're redirecting money that would go to them to you. You're investing in yourself. You're taking what would otherwise be tax dollars and investing in the things that are more interest to you. And I think that's the mindset of most entrepreneurs, right? I can do this better than some other person or the government or whatever. Mm-hmm. So think about that as a tool to create financial wealth, but also just to create a richer life in the broader sense.
Awesome. Well, what do you have that's coming up that our moguls in the making should know about? And what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Sure. So this is actually a pure coincidence. At the company, every month we run Wealth Thrive. We run a sort of educational webinar that are called Thrive Talks, and they're on a whole variety of topics. Some are technical, some are life coaching things. But in June, we're running one specifically on taxes. So right now,
all right, hot topic.
Very cool things that entrepreneurs at all scales, some are applicable to people making $1 gazillion and some are applicable to people just starting out. If they went to our website, which is just wealththrive.com, I imagine there's an announcement there. The best way for them to reach me is we have a funnel or whatever they call it. But if you go to that thing that I just mentioned, that's just the website. But if you go to Thrive Beyond Tax.
Okay. ThriveBeyondTax.com.
There's information there. The book that we just talked about, I think, is there. And if they wanted to, only if they wanted to, talk to me, they can fill out a little form and schedule some personal time to talk if they thought that would be valuable.
I love that. Well, I know you've got a jam to get to, a very important phone call. Thank you, Peter. We have Peter Culver, co-founder of Wealth Thrive. Thank you so much for being on the show. That's a wrap for today's episode of Do Different Better, where we talked about all things succession, selling, and securing your business legacy, and a little bit about taxes and Peter's book that you should definitely check out. Whether you're dreaming of a graceful retirement or a fat tax, legacy is what lives beyond you. I am so grateful to have you. Thank you so much. We will see you next time on the Do Different Better Show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a great one, y'all.
Thank you.